minute and let people trickle in, and we'll get set up and we'll get going. Cells, and I mean it this time. We really are going to talk about cells, right? Enough screwing around. Imagine, if you can, were you a alien who's come to Earth? You may already find yourself in that position if you actually are some sort of transgalactic pod person who's crash landed and trying to fit in. Maybe that's true, maybe it's not. And your job as a alien being on this Earth is to report back to the home planet, or soon to be future overlords, and tell them what life on Earth is like. What is life on Earth like?
Nasty British and short.
Yeah, so I mean, there's all kinds of ways we can answer that question. We can say, well, it's interesting. Well, they watch TV a lot, and everyone seems to have a symbiotic relationship with a small electronic square that they look at most of the time, which is odd because there's this whole beautiful world, but we just kind of look at this little thing all the time. So there's all kinds of sort of ways that could sort of be described. If that transgalactic being who has crash landed here, or not crash landed safely here, wants to report back to Earth on like what life is like, purely from the biological point of view, they would say, well, there's pretty much three major things to say that between these three things totally govern, dictate, and describe the entirety of all life on Earth as it exists. The first one would be life is made of cells. The cell is the fundamental unit of it. Everything that is alive is cellular. So the cell is the unit. The cell is the unit. No cells, not alive. Cells, alive. 100% true. Wink. Maybe. And the grand overlord would say, great, what else do you got? I'll say, cells can be, let me start over. Life can be single-celled or multi-celled. Which one are you? You go with the multi-celled variety. Trying to describe, okay, what's the difference between being single-celled and multi-celled? What does it really mean? And we talked about this, is this class we talked about that in? I always talk about the same thing in all of them. I give the same lecture once a semester. What is the unit of the individual here, right? Where's the you of the you-ness? I did talk about this. When you say I am me, you're talking about the multi-celled collective of it. Not everything does that. A lot of things do the I am me, but they're a single-celled organism. Things like bacteria and single-celled protists and archaeans and things like that. So it's like the you-ness of you is a multi-celled organism. And what this means is that you can lose some of them, you can lose some of your cells and still be you. And you can replace and recycle a lot of those cells and you're still you, right? So level of individual does not always equal the cell. That's another way to sort of say the second one. You with me? Good. Third thing would be all cells come from where?
Other cells?
Yeah, pre-existing. No. All cells come from pre-existing cells. Go ahead.
Then where did the first one come from?
Wait. This is true for every cell on Earth that is currently alive. Correct? Every cell that is alive today came from a pre-existing cell. There may be a couple of exceptions to this in universal history. For example, then where did the first one come from? That's a real question. Right? We answered that question on the first day of Bio 102, which I'm teaching a couple of sections of, I believe, in the spring. It's my shameless sales pitches. If you're interested in doing more of it. So this is true for all cells today. So if the alien comes in and says, okay, all life on Earth, where does it all come from? Well, it all came from the previous generation of it, including you, right? So you were at one time in your life unicellular. You were one cell. You very rapidly started to divide. What it means to be multicellular is, for many complex things that are eukaryotes like us, it means that for the next generation of us down the line, there's two ways we can do it. You're all currently engaged in the act of reproduction. As we speak, you're currently reproducing. You're making new cells all over the place, right? In your skin, in your kidneys, and you're all over the place, you're making new cells. So are you currently reproducing?
Why are you looking at us like that? I don't like that
Just
word.
waiting for an answer. Are you currently reproducing?
Yes.
Kind of. It's like your cellular units are reproducing, your DNA is being replicated. You're making more copies of the cellular imprint of yourself. Are you as an individual reproducing, making more copies of the selfness of you? Well, no, and it's not appropriate to do so in public, on campus, in the middle of class. With me?
Okay.
Good. Just a free one there to write down for your notes for later. No reproduction during class. Just gotta write it down. But in order to do that, though, should you want to have this strange thing called a baby, you're going to engage in a series of activities. Probably nothing you haven't heard before, right? The biological activities that you're going to engage in are going to be, you're going to make some cells that you're going to pass on to the next generation. Gentlemen, you will make sperm. Ladies, la 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 la, right? You will make eggs. And then they talked about this in like high school health class and stuff, right?
More like fifth grade.
Fifth grade, sixth grade, I don't know. Awesome. So guys, you're going to have kids, they're called sperm. Ladies, you're going to have kids, they're called eggs. Your biological grandkids are going to be this thing that looks like a baby, right? So it's like, what is the thing that you're actually sitting into the next generation? It's really just sperm and eggs. Those fuse together to give this other weird meta thing that's like half you and half the other person. That's going to be the new human. And that new human is going to make, those new humans are going to make sperm and eggs, and then they're going to fuse and make this next generation. So we think our next generation is like this baby. Technically not. The next generation is the sperm and egg. The generation after that is the baby. It's a weird, different kind of way to think about it. So your actual biological next generation doesn't look anything like you. It's a single-celled organism that contains a random half of your DNA. And then those fuse together and give you kind of this form of it again. And then you get the sperm and egg form of it again. And then you get this form of it again. Kind of really a weird thing. So our humans are weird, and so are plants in this way. They sort of go back and forth between being multicelled and unicelled and multicelled and unicelled and multicelled and unicelled. Right? So, and the good thing for us is that we don't have to send our sperm and eggs to college. Right? They're very, very cheap to make. Very cheap to make. So should you decide to care for your children in an economic way, your human next generation after that, you're technically taking care of your grandkids, which are only half yours to begin with. You know? So it's a curious perspective on what this whole life thing really is. And this is sort of interesting to kind of talk about, because when we think about animals, really don't think, I mean, obviously we think of the next generation as the baby thing that looks kind of like us that grows into this thing that looks like that. I mean, let's not be ridiculous here. But if we're talking about this from the plant kingdom, like how do plants reproduce? They have sperm, they have eggs, those things fuse together, right? But the weird thing about it is the next generation that is equivalent to the sperm and eggs in an animal will actually grow into a multi-celled thing outside of the body that does not look like the adult plant. And then it will undergo a cellular division process to make sperm and eggs that will fuse and make the new oak tree. It's really weird. So it's like if your sperm and eggs, you threw them out into the world, they landed somewhere and they started to divide and they got arms and legs and they got a job and went to college and all that other kind of stuff. And then they had another generation. That was the next thing. So the weird thing about our animal reproduction is that sperm egg phase only stays, it's very transient. They're only single celled. They don't start dividing after that until fertilization happens. But plants do it differently, you know, so it's how weird is that? How weird is that? You know, so it's like if you took an egg and threw it out there and it started to like grow and divide and called you mom and all that kind of stuff. Gross. So this is what you would say. So there are a couple of exceptions, right? Except for a cell or cells, depending on what this first colony sort of looked like. We talked about this in Bio 102, the Miller-Urey experiment, how does life originate? Great conversation. But this one as well, because we have this strange question about them. What do we do with viruses? What do we do with a virus? Is the virus alive or not? Because it has some of the properties of life. It acts kind of lifey a little bit, but it doesn't have others of it. It has the barrier to separate the inside from the outside. A lot of the times that barrier can be phospholipid if it picks it up from, you know, a host that it's in. It has a DNA or RNA strand that it uses as a template to make proteins, you know, all that is, so they have replicating material. They're able to engage in Darwinian evolution. So natural selection works very, very well with viruses. This is why we have all these variants now of alpha, beta, delta, omicron, all that other kind of stuff. Natural selection works on them. The kicker is, where the argument is that, oh, that is great. However, they don't have their own metabolism. They don't have they cannot convert energy on their own. Every metabolic process they have to borrow from you, essentially the host. And that's why they do this whole invade the cell kind of nonsense where what does the virus actually need you to do? Well, it needs your DNA replicase, it needs your RNA synthase, it needs your helicase, that kind of stuff to actually go into your DNA and get coded for itself. And the dumb thing about it is most viruses, what viral DNA or RNA actually codes for is the protein coat that holds the DNA. So it's like this weird circular, the DNA codes for the protein coat that holds the DNA, that codes for the protein coat that holds it. It's like the DNA doesn't do anything except inform about how to make its own packaging. It's like if you had a box and you opened it up and inside the box was the instructions on how to make a box. And how to make copies of the instructions how to make a box. And so you use those instructions to make another box, and you put a copy of it and you give it to somebody and they open it, and inside of it are the instructions on how to make a box. And you make a photocopy of the instructions and you make the box and you put it in and you give it to somebody else. They're dumb like that. It's like they're not out there, they're not trying to kill you, they're not doing weird fancy stuff, they're not doing weirdo things. It literally is just the instructions on how to make a new container for themselves. The downside is the receptor, and you know this from COVID, the receptor that they bond to can have consequences for your health. As the ACE2 receptor is bound to by the COVID-19 virus, it takes out the entire part of your system that relies on the ACE2 receptor, which is, it's called the RAS system, renal aldosterone system. It's part of your, like how your kidneys regulate blood pressure and things like that. Mostly ACE2 receptor is found in the throat, in the gastrointestinal system, in the frontal lobes of the brain, particularly related to smell, things like that. And so what the RAS2 does, or what the ACE2 does, in part of the blood pressure regulation, ACE1 will raise your blood pressure up and ACE2 suppresses it, right? So if your ACE2 gets wiped out, you start to have all these, blood pressure, blood flow, gastrointestinal, you can't absorb nutrients, and you lose your sense of smell because it attacks the cells in your brain that do olfaction. So it's like the Omicron really doesn't do that too much anymore, but the original Alpha, Beta, Delta, one of the first symptoms was you couldn't smell anything. Remember that? Anybody have like a head cold where you couldn't smell anything? That's a blockage that you get like in the nose. That's like your sinuses are swollen and blocked. When COVID knocks out your sense of smell, it does it like literally in your brain. It's like, your nose is working just fine. It's literally the, how do I turn these molecules into a model of reality thing that sort of doesn't work, which is kind of neat. But, with these viruses that we all know of, that we all suffer from, are they alive? Well, if metabolism is a requirement, the answer is no. If metabolism is negotiable, the answer is, okay, I guess, maybe. So people it's a common topic in like bioethics classes about whether viruses have the properties of life or not, because they do a lot of it. They do the natural selection part. They may not have all the same stuff, they just can't convert their own energy. So, but that's not a requirement for taking over the world because they already have taken over the world. But they're just small. So viruses, obviously, we don't want to get as many of them as we can, but they are instrumental in the history of life on Earth as well, in a lot of interesting ways. They've been hot sometimes. So, any questions about any of this so far? We refer to this structure of cellular reality as describes all life on Earth as cell theory. The cell is the fundamental unit of life. All life consists of one or more cells. All cells come from pre-existing cells. And it seems kind of general and kind of vague and sort of simplistic, but it's one of the few things that you can actually do to report on that really does descriptively sort of describe all of life on Earth. As you might imagine it. Go ahead.
When you die, does it
When
stop?
I die?
No. Does it stop?
Use the word I. Use the word I.
When I die.
Okay, when you die,
When I die, does it stop automatically or still goes on for?
what's the it?
Cell reproduction.
Does cell reproduction continue?
Yeah.
Funny question. Maybe for a little bit. When my dad passed away, he had a heart attack and he went without a heart rate or heartbeat for about 45 minutes. and they got his heart started again. But he never regained consciousness after that. He was probably brain dead after they got his heart started. And so he lived on a respirator for about a week before sort of pull the plug. Anybody have an experience like this? Anybody? So bear with me, right? If these are not things we want to talk about on a Thursday morning based on your histories or whatever, or mine. But if anybody has ever been in the room when the plug is sort of pulled, it's not like funk. I mean, they don't yank a cord out of the wall, I mean, that's sort of how it works. You just turn off the ventilator. But when they turn off the ventilator, they also turn off the EKG heart monitor because the heart will continue to beat for upwards of an hour or two. You'll get an electrical signal in there after the respirator is off. The heart generates its own electrical signal. And what we know about the death process that all people go through is for hours afterwards, reactions will still be cascading through the body. Electrical signal. You'll go until you run out of ATP, wherever you can sort of squeeze it from. Some aspects of anaerobic respiration can still be continuing. Electrical signaling can still sort of be happening. It looks more and more like, death is not an instant thing. It's really is like a shutdown process, almost like turning off your laptop or something. It can take a while for all of it to sort of close out, it seems, which is curious. I don't know if like a cell or cells would say, we're at the end here, we're going to start dividing quickly. I don't know if that happens. Maybe the ones that are already get processed might, if you have enough ATP, but it's not an instantaneous, and then everything stops and we're done. It trickles out. Go ahead.
I've been next to a person as they were dying, like I was touching her,
Yeah.
and like what makes the body like go cold? Like I was there for a little bit. It wasn't like
What makes it go?
an instant cold. Like it was warm.
Blood flow
I was
stops.
like,
Blood flow stops.
oh, that just turns cold.
Yeah, the core temperature of the body stops distributing out to the hands and things.
But if you're already dead, and you're saying we're still having all those impulses, isn't the blood still? So the blood just stopped. But what is the?
The heart will stop pretty soon. The electrical signals in the heart will go on for about 45 minutes or an hour. So it's like your heart will generate its own electrical signaling to beat. That doesn't just shut down, right? Your neurons just don't just shut down. Digestion doesn't just shut down. I mean,
Is that why they do
the defibrillator.
right?
That's when the heart is dysregulated in its flexion, right? When all the muscles, tissues in your heart are not coordinated together with the sinoatrial node that's sending out that signal. So it's like, who's ever been to the symphony or seen a symphony? Who was in band in high school? So now we're talking. Ooh, what'd you play?
No, it was middle school.
Middle school. That works. What'd you play?
Percussion.
So did I when I was in marching band in college.
Nice.
Love that. And everybody's tuning their instruments and everybody's warming up, and they hear this weird cacophonous sound, and then you hear the tap 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 tap, and everybody settles out, and then music starts in a coordinated way. The defibrillator is essentially the conductor going tap 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 tap. So all the muscle fibers, all the individual instruments of the heart were kind of dysregulated on their own. They need to be reorganized into a synthetic rhythm. That's what the run the shock through it does.
I was just wondering because I passed away.
For how long? For how
2
long?
minutes.
How long?
2 minutes.
2 minutes?
Yeah, I had a blood clot
Wow.
that went straight to my heart.
Do you remember it?
I actually do.
I'm sure nobody in the class would be interested in hearing about what
Yeah.
happened. But,
I know people are like, don't talk about it.
oh, freaking absolutely talk about it. Yeah, who's interested? And only what you're willing to share.
No, I mean, I
If
had
that
a
can
blood
be-
clot that was on my leg, and then all of a sudden it went to my heart.
Yeah.
And I was like, this feels weird. I can't breathe. And boom, done. I was like out. I do remember. I guess I was like,
Did you leave?
out of my body.
Yeah,
Like, I can
yeah.
see them doing things.
Wow.
And it was 2 minutes. And then once I was in my room, I was with a respirator I was in the hospital for like 3 months.
Wow.
But I always had a priest next to me because they're like, she can go anytime.
Anytime, yeah. Yeah, wow,
Because I still have the blood clot.
wow.
It takes a while
Yeah, it does.
for a blood clot
To dissolve.
that big to
To
dissolve.
dissolve. Huh, how long ago was this?
It was 2008.
A little while?
Yeah.
Did you come back with any information that you would like to share from the other side?
I actually went, so I know I'm a good person because I went. I didn't see bad things. I did go up, and it was weird.
Interesting.
It was really strange because I was at a gate and I couldn't lift, something was holding my head down. I couldn't lift my head up to see exactly like what's in front of me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It was like a force, like you can't like lift your,
How interesting. How interesting.
I mean, of course, anybody in here who's not religious is gonna be like, whatever, but
Sounds like you were going, it
That's
sounds like you were
exactly
going
how it
into that
happened to
subdivision
me.
in Oakton, right? With the gate and everything.
Was there like clouds? Like.
Pink fluffy clouds and, you know, Peter at a podium right next to the gate looking for.
I mean, I don't remember going through like clouds. I just remember I was over my body. I can see everything happening. I can hear
Yeah,
what's going on. And then I remember I was at a gate. It was like an arch. It was real bright. It was a gate, and there was someone standing there.
That's wild.
You literally went to heaven.
Yeah, like literally. I know. My partner keeps saying, they didn't want you. So
Yeah. You're not done yet.
Then
You're
you
going back.
weren't
You're
allowed
going
in,
back.
so that's why you came back.
Are you
People
sure
doesn't
you were
die.
as good as a person as you say you are? My mom, when my grandmother was my grandmother passed away from, we'll get back to cells here in a second, but it's not unrelated. My grandmother, when she was dying, she sort of slowly went over the span of about 2 or 3 days. She had this weird cancer in her leg, like not inherent, like there's just very little cancer in our family. It's not something that we tend to get. So it was random one-off leg muscle cancer. It's like, what the hell? And it's kind of spread throughout her body. And then, her body started to shut down. She was like 86 or 87. So she had a long and happy life and everything was fine. She was not taken too young or anything. And she started to hallucinate for a couple of days before. She had stopped eating, she had stopped drinking. Her body was starting to shut down a little bit, but she was still a little bit vocal and a little bit mobile. And she was looking at the drapes in our living room. And she would say, that's the weirdest thing. Who would write on the drapes? Who would write all these words on the drapes? Who would write these words on the drapes? And my mother, bless her heart, you know what she asked what my mom told my grandmother?
Just go.
Now, Mom, nobody wrote on the drapes. Go back to bed. It's like, you didn't ask her what they said? It's like, what? It was like, talk about a wasted effort. Because she was, she was saying I just had this wonderful conversation with Emil. And Emil was her brother that died 20 years ago, kind of thing, So it's like she was going through all of that. But it's like, Mom, it's like, you could have unlocked the mysteries of it all. And it's like, no, Mom, there aren't any words on the drapes. It's like, she can read them. Oh my God. It was very frustrating. It was very frustrating. You don't get opportunities like that often.
Yeah.
You don't get opportunities like that often. Y'all get this? It's called cell theory. It's an actual thing. So should you go on to future biology or biological careers or something like that, it does get talked about in cellular biology circles. It's called cell theory. It's pretty cool.
My great grandpa didn't give them the opportunity. He was at the hospital. And
Didn't get what?
He didn't give them the opportunity to know something because he was at the hospital and he ran away.
Mm.
And people that noticed him, they were saying that they heard him say, "I'm following somebody.
Mm.
Wait for me." And then he
Yeah, it's fascinating. Right. All kinds of stuff happens up here. Like the brain is super active during the shutdown. Super active during shutdown.
There's a really good short story called Bullet in the Brain or something like that. Diana, we had to read it for English.
Yeah.
It's about the guy who got shot in the head, and it's playing everything. It's so cool.
That's weird. Interesting. The very first cell biologist was a gentleman named Robert Hooke. Robert Hooke. I say this every time. Has anybody taken chemistry or physics? Anyone? A little bit. Which one? Chemistry or physics?
High school.
That's okay. It's a pretty simple thing. There's a law in physics called Hooke's law. You ever heard of Hooke's law? It's like elasticity in springs a little bit. It's like how much torsion or tension can a spring take before it sort of goes back. This is the Hooke of Hooke's law. He was the very first researcher for the Royal Academy of Sciences in London. We're talking about like 1630, 1640, 1650, 1660. He was around during the fire in 1666 in London. And at the time, he was the Royal Society researcher. He was also the city planner for the city of London. So like how wide should the streets be? How many houses should we have on a block? That was Robert Hooke, right? He was like the researcher / city planner for the city of London. After London burned to the ground, he and a compadre of his named Christopher Wren, who was an architect, redesigned the new London after the fire. So the street layout of London as it is today is the street layout of Robert Hooke. And a lot of the architecture of the spires on all the churches and things like that, of those old 1600 buildings, is Christopher Wren, who partnered up with them to rebuild London after the fire. Which was the best thing that could have happened in London because it got rid of the plague. Which was kind of a cool thing. Well, the plague wasn't a cool thing. Getting rid of the plague was the cool thing. Unfortunately, it took a fire to anyway. But he's like the first microbiologist. Which is appropriate for us because today's lab is going to be all things microscopes. We're going to do a lot of microscope stuff today. We're going to learn how to use them, learn how to not use them, learn how to make slides of your cheek cells so you can look at them under the microscope, look at plant cells under the microscope, all kinds of cool things. It's going to be delightful. We can see what we need to do for that. We can get cells from all kinds of places. And he developed a technique of looking at things under a microscope. He's not the inventor of the microscope. The inventor of the microscope was a gentleman named Anton van Leeuwenhoek, a Dutch gentleman who was a glass blower. And this glass blower, Anton van Leeuwenhoek, could kind of blow glass in a way where it had these optical properties of magnification. And what Anton van Leeuwenhoek and some of his friends noticed is if you take a couple of these lenses and put them in a tube and look down with it, things that are small look big. And then Galileo said, yeah, but if I take that and look up with it, things far away look close. So a microscope and a telescope are sort of the same thing, and we always hear about Galileo looking up at the moons of Jupiter and things like that. Something about Venice and the tower and the Doge, right? Which doesn't lean, right? Some of the stories here in the West are of the leaning. You went up the Leaning Tower of Pisa. It's like, I think it was the tower in St. Mark's Square, isn't it? That Galileo was,
The bell tower.
Yeah, in St. Mark's, he went up and to do that. And he's looking at all this kind of stuff, and Galileo's observation with those lenses essentially kept Copernicus out, because Copernicus was doing this heliocentrism kind of thing, and Galileo's observation of Jupiter showed that these little things go around these big things, that it looks like the Earth is one of these little things too, and so we might be going around the really big thing, which is actually the sun, which is kind of cool. And Robert Hooke said, yeah, but I can look down with it as well. I can look down at lake water and I can look down at these plants and all this kind of stuff. And the things that are small look big, which is really what a telescope does. Jupiter is small, but then it looks big. So like a telescope and a microscope are kind of the same thing a little bit. And he said, and he was looking at some cork that you may or may not know from like wine bottles and cork and things like that, of cork from cork. And when you look at cork, you get these plant cell walls. We'll see some of these in lab that kind of go like that. And he said, these individual little squares in this cork, they look like those little rooms that monks and nuns cloister themselves into in monasteries. And you know what those little rooms are called? Cells. Those little rooms are called cells. So what makes Robert Hooke the first microbiologist or cellular biologist is he's the first one. He's not the first one to see a cell. He's the first one to see it and call it a cell. And then he wrote a book. called the Micrographia. I think we have a reprinted, not original, copy of it in the Science Learning Center up on the second floor in the library up there. There's a copy of the Micrographia. And he drew pictures of like fleas and cork and plant. He was just grabbing all the stuff that he could and putting it under his little microscope and then drawing a picture of it. So it's essentially a show and tell of microscopic things circa 1670 or 1680, which is kind of neat. And that opened up the whole world of there's all kinds of stuff out there that we don't see, that is literally covering every surface that we're currently in contact with. I mean, just the number of microscopic stuff, just like in your bed, is enormous. Stuff is covering every surface you're in contact with, your desk, your Starbucks cup, it's everywhere. The germaphobes are like, stop now. It's there's a whole world of things that are larger than us in the universe. There's also a whole world of stuff that is smaller than us. And these are essentially, this work is the windows to both with these lenses that Leeuwenhoek was making. Very cool, very cool. Robert Hooke. He also had a hateful and vitriolic relationship with Isaac Newton. They were both contemporaries of the Royal Society at the time. And they absolutely, positively hated each other's guts. Hate is not too strong of a word for their relationship. It's like super well documented. They have vitriolic hate for each other.
Do we know why?
They just really seem to not get along. Newton, we see the pictures of Isaac Newton, and he's like, has a prism and he's looking at light go through and he's like poking a nail in his eye to make his eye deform a little bit and look at all the weird colors, optics. He's off in the countryside. So when the plague hit London, Isaac Newton took off and he went out into the countryside and invented calculus. And thinking about like gravity and all this other kind of nonsense. And Robert Hooke's gutting it out in London, trying to city plan with Christopher Wren what the new London looks like. They're just thinking along with each other. Have you ever just like had a hateful relationship with someone just because? There's not really good reason. You just hate the son of a bitch, right?
The biography of Newton says Newton is very jealous of the young genius.
Yeah,
and also take over a lot of the inventions actually created by other people.
Yeah. So Isaac Newton was probably not the saint that he's made out to be. Long story short, he didn't cite his work, sort of, so to speak, right? Leibniz, the co-inventor, is not the co-inventor. Leibniz and Newton didn't get together and invent calculus. Leibniz sort of independently did, and Isaac Newton's like, shut that man down, right? So, but Newton hated Robert. So there's only one known actual painting of Robert Hooke. And the theory, the story is that Isaac Newton, after Robert Hooke died, had them burned, like trying to remove him from history. He knew too much. So there's a hateful relationship, which is hilarious. So Isaac Newton has this saying that oftentimes is said during collegiate and high school graduations. The only reason I can see so far is from standing on the shoulders of giants. Is what he says, and it's now thought that might have actually been a dig at Robert Hooke, because Robert Hooke had scoliosis, right? He had this kind of this back deformation, and it's like, but I'm not standing on your shoulders, So it's like all this like subtle, shady, hateful stuff between the two of them, which is great for history. I'm not sure why there's not an HBO special about it. I think that would be great fun. Robert Hooke. So cells exist in two different types. There are the prokaryotes. Prokaryotes. Pro first or before. If you kind of use pro for something, it's first or before. The karyon refers to like a kernel, like a piece, like a particle of something. Conversely, so the question might be, what is this carry-on? What is this kernel that we're talking about? We have the eukaryotes. Eu, which is the true or authentic. Carry-on is of course, the kernel referring to, not Sanders, referring to the nucleus. So the eukaryotes have a true authentic nucleus. The prokaryotes are those that exist before or first to the things that have the nucleus. Right? In other words, they don't have a nucleus. I could have just said that. What fun would that be? These words mean things, right? Prokaryotes, so they include things such as bacteria and the archaea. You know of the bacteria, correct? You've heard of them, covering every surface inside and out of you right now. And we have the archaea, which we don't oftentimes hear about, but they're weird and they're out there. They do strange things like sulfur reduction from hydrothermal vents as a source of energy. The prismatic pool in Yellowstone is a bunch of archaea that are metabolizing methane as it seeps out of volcanic ground. So you rarely find them in places where you go. You don't hang out in volcanoes or at undersea hydrothermal vents. Yeah, fair. You know, the day is young, right? We still might get there. They just do weird biochemical stuff. They don't use, they're not photosynthetic. They don't use the sunlight for energy, right? They don't break down carbon compounds for energy. They do other weird stuff, oftentimes with non-organic materials to get energy. They use chemistry in really creative and interesting ways, reminiscent of conditions on the early Earth. Wink, wink, nod, nod. The chemistry of the early Earth, it looks a lot more like what Archeans do than today. So today they're sort of relegated to the weird places. The intestinal tracts of cows, prismatic pools in volcanic areas, and deep sea hydrothermal vents. That's where we find them. Bacteria, they're everywhere. They're everywhere. From the atmosphere to the ocean floor. Right? You can collect bacteria in clouds. It's pretty wild. And the eukaryotes, so, let me go back. These two things, the bacteria and the archaea, are referred to as domains. There is domain. The domain is the taxonomic unit above the kingdom. So you are in the kingdom, Animalia. You are in the domain, Eukarya. Garden variety bacteria, right, or in the kingdom, whatever, there's a couple of kingdoms of bacteria. They are in the domain bacteria. Archeans are their own domain. So it's like if you think of Carl Linnaeus and kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, right? There's the kangaroos play checkers on fuzzy green squares. There's King Philip does something. These mnemonics for learning the Linnaean hierarchy. Did you learn those? I hear this King Philip thing sometime. I don't know where it comes from. That's not the way I learned it. But all life is organized in a hierarchy developed by Carl Linnaeus. Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. Above that is the domain. The other domain is the eukarya, so let's go over it like that. And they consist of the kingdoms Animalia, the plant day, or the plants. Should have made that one green. The fungi, just like me. Brooke, do you like that one? Fungi. and the Protista, which are all of the other eukaryotes that are not animals, plants, and fungi. That's literally how they're defined. They're a eukaryote that is not an Animalia, Plantae, or fungi. Like, what a dumb definition for a kingdom. So there's 6 total, 6 kingdoms total. We think it looks like this. Probably Archaea. They go on to today, they're still alive. Bacteria come out somewhere either up here or down here, kind of close to the base. But we think that eukaryotes are more closely related to archaeans than they are to bacteria. Up here we'll have the Animalia. The first cousin to the Animalia is the, what do you think? Fungi. We have the plants. Then we have all these other protists, which probably exist as a cloud in that sort of arrangement, which is kind of weird. Now, if you want to really watch me mess this whole thing up, you want to watch this? This is going to be great. Good luck keeping up with this one, Sylvie. So what defines a lot of photosynthetic organisms is the presence of a chloroplast. We'll talk about this next week when we really do a deeper dive into cell anatomy. When you look at a plant and you see that it's green, you're looking at the chloroplast. They're the photosynthetic unit of the thing. You with me? Chloroplast, so all plant cells, all photosynthetic things have chloroplasts in them as an organelle because the chloroplast is the photosynthetic unit. Those are bacterial in origin. All of those that have aerobic respiration have mitochondria. Mitochondria are the unit of aerobic respiration. In high school, we refer to the mitochondria as
It's like the one thing I couldn't
the
find.
powerhouse, that and survival of the fittest and, all that kind of stuff. Mitochondria, fun fact, are also bacterial in their origin. So you exist, darling, as a symbiotic relationship between a protist and aerobically respiring bacteria. Neat. Now inseparable from each other. But they have their own DNA, they have their own genome, they have their own ribosomes, they have their own replication process. But they still look, act, shaped, derived from, act like bacterial units within all of your cells.
Why there's 2 archaea?
Because they're still alive.
Still alive?
Yeah, so like the original, the original life on Earth, where did it come from? Origination thing was probably Archean, and they're still here today. Right, so it's like, and they're still here, so they didn't like crap out or anything like that. Very good. Make sense? Very good. That whole tree's a mess, though. You can start adding up all these other little components to it, and you can look at the phyla within the animals and the phyla within the plants, and you can start adding all kinds of neat nuance to it. Questions about any of this? Go ahead.
So just to make sure I understand with the 2 arrows, the lower one is representing where mitochondria evolves.
Yeah.
and the
Where mitochondria sort of becomes, so to speak. Both, and if you look at them, it's like the endosymbiosis to a protist from mitochondria predates the chloroplast as a plant thing. Plants have, by virtue of the fact that plants have mitochondria as well. So the common ancestor of, so all of these protists, most of them, not quite all, many have mitochondria, only some have chloroplasts. So it's like when we see a lot of a thing out there like a mitochondria, where it's all kinds of representation all throughout the eukaryotes, those tend to show up in history earlier than the things that are less common. right? So it's like, the plants are really the only thing that got the chloroplast, but some protists do as well, like algae kelp and things like that, but not all. But like almost all of these eukaryotes have a mitochondria, although the mitochondria predates the chloroplast as an organelle. Questions, thoughts? More about that in Bio 102 when we do some tree building. Questions? Perfect. I have drawn one, larger than life size. They do have DNA, and it is circular. It exists as a ring in the prokaryotes. It does not have a nucleus. It does not have a nuclear envelope. It doesn't have Golgi. It doesn't have smooth and rough ER. It doesn't have any of that nonsense, right? It is essentially a loop of DNA shoved into the corner of the cell. It can be stained using dyes and looked at under a very strong microscope, and you can see it. It is referred to as a nucleoid. But it's not like a separate, like organelle or something like that. It's not separated by cell membrane from the rest of it.
Will they only have one nucleoid or can they have multiple?
They will have one primary, but they do other weird things too. They do other weird things too. Those weird things being, essentially, if you have another one, another bacteria, and it can be of a different species. And this one figures out through genetic mutation how to be resistant to penicillin. And it will take that gene that confers penicillin resistance, make a little DNA loop out of it, and find its neighbors and begin the process that is referred to as conjugation. It will take this little loop that says be resistant to penicillin, and it will start to share it with its neighbors, even if the neighbor is of a different species of bacteria. So when we think about all these bacteria today that are antibiotic resistant, it's not that natural selection reproduced more of the ones that are and less of the ones that aren't. Surely some of this happens. However, they're sharing with each other the information on how to evade antibiotics, cross species, which sucks, right?
Is that big circle the cell?
Yeah, this is a big bacteria.
Oh.
This is a big bacteria. This is the bacteria sharing the information on how to be antibiotic resistant with the other one. Go ahead.
If this doesn't have anything to do with cells, it's just a question. Does chemo, like, does it work? Like, can the reason chemo doesn't work be because of something like that?
I have not heard chemotherapy being subject to that. It's usually just biological antibiotics. I have not heard that chemotherapy.
I don't even know what chemotherapy, like, I should, but I don't even.
Why should you?
My mom died from cancer.
Oh, I'm sorry. Very sorry.
I really don't know.
I'm sorry about that. We try to not should ourselves any more than we need to. We use it as a weapon against ourselves when we should ourselves. Stop shooting all over yourself.
Okay.
Use that again. Not much there. Not much there, right? When they reproduce, they go through a process called binary fission. They replicate their DNA. And divide into. Not a lot to it. Not a lot to it. Pretty straightforward thing. Is an end. Thus concludes our conversation about bacteria. There's not much to it.
What's the C before binary?
What's the what?
The C before binary.
This is a little arrow thing. I'm not sure what it really means. I sort of did it because that's what my hand did. That was as interesting to see me doing it as you were.
Oh.
I was as interested to see me writing that as you were.
See,
I reminded you.
My hand has a,
Have it.
the only informant biologist here is my right shoulder down. Reem, you all good?
No,
Can I take it?
Of course. Of me or it?
What is it?
you could be in it.
Was it me or was it bacterial? Large. Bless you. Then we have the eukaryotes. We will draw another large eukaryotic cell on Monday and Tuesday in class. It's like, what class is this? On Tuesday in class, we're not quite done yet. It will fill the board. It'll fill the board. We're gonna draw every organelle in context and what it does on Tuesday. It's gonna be great. If you have colored pencils, that might be the time to bring them, but not required. Well, it's also gonna be your homework for next week as well, so it's gonna be fun. Oh, boo, boo, boo. But in short, cell membrane, which is made of phospholipid bilayer, PBL, not PBR, that's different. Pass me rid of beer.
oh,
The nucleus. That has a bunch of DNA in it, and in the eukaryote cell, the DNA is linear, not circular. Bacteria have circular DNA where it goes into a loop. Eukaryotes have linear DNA where it's long strands. And you have (46) chromosomes. 23 of them came from your mom, and 23 came from your
Dad.
dad. Lovely. More about this in a month when we talk about Gregor Mendel and all of his nonsense with heredity. Yay. I guess it's not nonsense. It's pretty important, I imagine. Right. Cool. Because you have 2 of each chromosome, so you have 2 chromosome number 1s, you have 2 chromosome number 2s, you have 2 chromosome number 3s, correct? 23 from mom, 23 from dad. You are referred to as being diploid. Diploid. So here's you, and you are diploid. You will make, sperm and eggs, each of which have 23. I should say sperm or eggs. If we have only one copy of the genome, we refer to it as being haploid. sperm and eggs then combine to make a new (46) chromosome diploid thing. So this gets back to where we started when I was saying your true children are the sperm and eggs, right? The sperm and eggs then fuse to make a new diploid thing. This is referred to as alternation of generations. If you look at generations going from one generation to the next, they alternate between diploid, haploid, diploid, haploid, diploid, haploid. And this is where I also started as well. We have the adult common thing that we sort of know and love. You make sperm and eggs, which are technically your next generation, but they only exist as a single cell. And then they fuse and you get another generation. Yes? Make sense? You know this from 5th grade health class, right? Is this new information to you?
No.
Cool. And if it was, they're not going to raise their hand, I guarantee it. In plants, these things actually start dividing and growing into a separate thing. That's kind of the weird thing that we don't do, right? We don't just like throw a sperm and eggs out there and they start growing into something. They don't do that. In plants, they do, which is weird. But we're not plants, are we? What do you think? Good information today? We'll fill in all of this stuff so we have like rough ER and smooth ER and Golgi and a bunch of ribosomes, and we have like mitochondria, and we have like peroxisomes and lysosomes, all the stuff that we'll get to on Tuesday. Would you like a half an hour between now and lab?
Yes.
Perfect. Are you full for the day with content of this sort? Yes? Yes? If you're not speaking, the answer is yes. So take a half an hour. I'll see you at 11:10 over in, what, 114? Get some fresh air, grab a bite to eat or something like that if you'd like to, and I'll see you over there. It's going to be great. Hey, what's up?
So she said their mom wants to know right now. So